Portland State University, and she'll be talking to us about building trust in elections. Stephanie, I think you should have the ability to share your screen now.
Okay, hold on. Share screen.
Terrific.
All right, can you see a big green slide saying building trust in elections? Great. Well, let me just jump right in. First of all, I want to thank the National Science Foundation for funding, Verified Voting for funding. And the third image here is a picture of the 8th Ward in Philadelphia. And I want to thank the voters of the 8th Ward, the people of the 8th Ward, and the party machines in Philadelphia for the very deep political education that I received from them. So what I want to do today is 3 things. I want to first tell you about the Vote Visualizer, which is a tool that I've just built over the past couple years. I want to give you the timeline from 2005 to 2020 of what made this this project possible. And finally, I want to share with you some things that I've learned since I was in the ivory tower. I should say I was in the ivory tower until 2002, and then I was out of the ivory tower, and now I'm halfway back in. So what is the Vote Visualizer? The Vote Visualizer is a public website. You can go to it now. If you get bored during my talk, you can just go play around with it. It's at verifiedvoting.org. And it is a tool for discovering outliers in election results. It has, the code repository, if you're interested, is at GitHub. And it has two main features. One is called Explore Top Outliers, and it curates outliers. So it actually does some active analysis. There's an algorithm. And if you say, for instance, I'm interested in congressional contests in North Carolina in 2018, it will show you some of the most interesting outliers. And the one that you see here is one that actually led to a reversal of election results because it turned out that someone was cheating in Bladen County, and that person got caught. And it comes up naturally from the analysis. The other piece of it is a more free-form way to draw scatter plots and explore election results on your own. And the nice thing is that you can just draw tons and tons and tons of different scatter plots. So this is a scatter plot for the one I showed you. And I'm sorry, Bladen is mislabeled here. I don't know, can you see my pointer? This is Bladen County. Not this one, this one. So you can visually see the outlier. And you can do all kinds of things. So for instance, a lot of people were interested this year in absentee versus election day voting. And you can look by county at Pennsylvania or any other state or any territory or the District of Columbia. And you can just see how performance on absentee ballots versus election day, how turnout was different in those two different methods by county in Pennsylvania. Or you can do a kind of comparative analysis one year over the other. This is on the horizontal is Republican votes for Republican state legislature in 2016, and on the vertical it's votes for Republican state legislature in 2020. So things that are above the X equals Y line are counties where in 2020 there were more votes for the local state rep from that county than there were in 2016. So if you're involved in politics in California, you know, you kind of want to know, like, what county is this and what happened there? Why did someone do so much better in 2020 than in 2016? And, you know, likewise, San Diego, what thing on the ground made that difference. And it's important to note that when you look at election data, you're going to find a lot of outliers. And it is really crucial never to jump to the conclusion that that outlier is because someone cheated, because elections are just full of absolutely legitimate outliers. And I can't tell you how many times I have found something and I'm like, okay, I've been in this business for 15 years and I can't think of a single explanation for this. It actually just happened this year. And then you go and you talk to the Board of Elections and they're like, oh yeah, well, when we did the recount and uploaded the data, this thing happened, you know, so really, there are all kinds of legitimate outliers. I want to give you my favorite example of a legitimate outlier. So this is from my own election. I ran for Philadelphia City Commissioner. It's a citywide contest to sit on the Board of Elections. And this is in one particular ward, or so one neighborhood of Philadelphia. Each dot here represents a precinct, and it's actually mislabeled. It's actually my opponent who's on the horizontal axis, and it's myself on the vertical. Okay, so I'm sorry that's mislabeled. You know, if you look at this for any length of time, you notice this point up here where I got way more votes than the trend line would suggest. And I would not blame my opponent in that contest for saying, what the heck happened in that precinct? And if that happened, and if I were challenged on that, I would tell them what happened in that precinct. What happened in that precinct was that my 17-year-old daughter stood there all day and said, vote for my mom, vote for my mom, vote for my mom. So, and this shows the power of this. Once any of you gets involved in a particular electoral contest and is actually trying to win elections, this is really powerful because you can take pretty much any graph that you can create on the vote visualizer. You can take any of these scatter plots and just ask, why is the outlier an outlier? So I think of this as a good undergraduate project. Possibly it's a high school project, I don't know, because what it involves is actually someone actually going in to Henry County, right? I mean, you don't have to go there physically, but you have to talk to people in Henry County and find out, you know, why is Henry County such an outlier here? And this is just kind of something I drew at random. What is this? Oh, this is from Georgia. This is the difference in votes for votes. Let's see. Absentee mail votes cast in the runoff election for Senate in Georgia just in January, and the general election last November, votes for US Senate in Georgia. So, you know, why were there so many more in the general election than in the runoff in Henry County? That's a great question. I don't know the answer. And the vote visualizer is full of these great questions. So, and I just want to go back and say one thing, which is that, you know, you may be looking at this and starting to think about what analysis could you do and what algorithm did I use to find the outliers in the other part of the visualizer, and what other algorithms are possible. And those are great questions, but I want to make sure you know that collecting this data is not easy. It is really, really hard. It's much harder than any other part of this project. And I am proud to announce that we have in hand, and soon will be up on the visualizer, the official results by county for federal, statewide, and most state legislatures for not just the 50 states, but the District of Columbia and the 5 territories, which, by the way, it's a very interesting story. How did they fall off the map? Look at a map of the US. Do you see the 5 territories? How did that happen? Why? When? Okay. So the problem is that these results are published at the state level, and they come in a variety of formats because every state board of elections can make its own choice about how to publish this. And the variety is staggering. it's not just variety in who puts what across the top and what down the side. It's all kinds of other variety. Okay, anyone who knows what MP stands for? I mean, UT Utah, TX Texas, NV Nevada, MP. If you know what MP stands for, please put it in the chat. Okay. All right, so that is the vote visualizer. And again, it is available publicly on the web at verifiedvoting.org. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about is the timeline of the vote visualizer. How did it come to be? And this is really over 15 years. So in 2005, I first asked myself the question, how could you tell that an election is fair? How can you verify that an election was fair? And I came up with a simple, what I thought of as like the simple first step, like, okay, what's the easy stuff you can do to tell that an election was fair? And I thought, well, you know, was the number of voters admitted to vote greater than or equal to the number of ballots cast? And at that point, I knew enough about elections to know that the number of voters admitted to vote is a number that you can get from the voter file, which is one source of data. And the number of ballots cast is something you can get from the election results, which is another source of data. So, so you have these two independently collected sources of data, generally in really actually very different computer systems. And so just get the number and compare it. I mean, that's really easy, right? It's not even, you don't even have to be in middle school to do that kind of comparison. What number is bigger than what other number, right? So Sarah will tell me if that's wrong, but so I thought this is a really simple question. And in fact, over the next 3 years, I made a little bit of progress on that question because it turned out it was really, really hard to get the data. So to get the number of voters admitted to vote, I needed to get the voter file. And right now you can get the Pennsylvania voter file for $20 for the whole state in electronic form. But back then it was over $1,000 just for a snapshot. And I had to sue the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which I did, with some help from some political people in the 8th Ward, actually, some legal advice and some funding that was donated by people who believed in me and wanted to draw me into the political establishment. So they funded a project that I was interested in. And in 2008, I got the other piece of data, at least in Philadelphia. They were publishing election results on paper. Come to the Board of Elections and look at them, and we will make a paper copy for you at 25 cents a page. That was the deal in Philadelphia. Well, when you win one lawsuit, then it's enough to just threaten another lawsuit. And I got the data in the electronic form from the city of Philadelphia. So look, in Philadelphia, I was set in 2008. I was ready to do this calculation. Well, then I got distracted. By that time, I was deep into the local Democratic committee in that ward that I showed you the picture of at the beginning. I was deep into politics and organizing, and I should say that I depended then, and I actually depend now very much for this kind of work on support for my family. Financial support. So I want to be really clear about that, that if you want to do good in politics, well, if you want to be in politics, there's a lot of work. It has to get paid from somewhere. And that's a whole other talk about the effects of that fact. All right. Anyway, I did a bunch of politics. I did a bunch of organizing. I ended up running against that election official, the one who wanted to give me stuff only on paper. She was a 36-year incumbent. I beat her. It was exciting. It was really the highlight of my life. I served for 4 years as an election official, full-time paid on the Philadelphia County Board of Elections. I loved that job. I loved it, loved it, loved it. And I did so much good there that the political machines kicked me out. And I arrived in Oregon. My daughter had moved to the West Coast. I arrived in Oregon, well, without a job, I kind of made my way doing various, proposing various projects to not-for-profits, and I got I did consulting work for not-for-profits, some for governments. I actually helped some governments perform what's called a risk limiting audit, which is a mathematically sound way to audit the computers that do the tabulations of the votes. What else did I do? I worked for a company that built open source election software. So the election software market, the voting machines, the computers, those systems, it's a very unusual and very tough market. A lot of proprietary stuff going on there, a lot of stuff hidden behind the proprietary wall. So yeah, I did this and that. I did a lot of interesting projects, started working for verified voting, doing a lot of work for them, and I still do. And then in 2019, I got some money from the National Science Foundation to build the vote visualizer. And so since then, that's what I've been doing over the past couple years. I suppose this timeline should go to 2021, but I think I ended it in 2020 because we collected this for the 2020 election. At any rate, that's the timeline, and I want to point out that I still really have not answered the original question. And it's in part because it's actually even harder than collecting the election results is collecting the numbers of ballots cast. And I think that's because why do state governments publish election results at all? Well, they publish them because the candidates insist that they do. And the candidates only care about how many votes for each candidate, because that determines who wins. And the number of ballots cast, that's like a technical detail of election administration that is not actually germane to who won the election. And what everyone really, really cares about is who won the election. So that's the timeline. Let's see. Oh, I still have some time. Okay. So next, I wanted to just share with you some things that I learned over the years. As I said, in 2002, that's when I left academia, and I had a very kind of straight arrow education. I'd done well in math in college, and so I went to grad school, and then, so I got a job teaching at Haverford College, which is down the road from Swarthmore College, much to the chagrin of my family. I'm a product of the Quaker Matchbox era. My parents met at Swarthmore College. So anyway, my family dynamics aside, where was I? Oh yeah, so I was pretty ignorant of the real world, and I got a real world education in Philadelphia, and I learned some things, and I want to share with you some of the things I learned. So first of all, democracy is not about fairness. Democracy is about power. It is simply a power sharing arrangement. Yeah, so for instance, well, and how do you get power in a democracy? You get power in a democracy by voting in blocks, by voting, and not by individuals deciding who they're going to vote for and doing all their research and being smart about it. That does not give you power in democracy. What gives you power in democracy is being part of a group of people who all vote the same way and who have a leader who can go to the elected officials and say, I want you to do X for my people. So for example, when I was eventually the ward leader of the Democratic Party in the 8th Ward in Philadelphia, which meant actually I had a lot of clout. It's a big ward. There are a lot of people in it. People vote. So that was a very important position. And overnight, I went from a person who couldn't get anybody's attention in government to being called back in person the same day by all my local elected officials if I wanted to, because they knew that I affected this big group of people that voted. But in the 8th Ward, 8th Ward is like, white, rich, educated ward. And everyone's like, oh, I'm going to make my own independent decision, which is great. But right up, a few miles away was the 50th Ward. And the 50th Ward was about the same size. And it is an old school, mostly African-American ward. And people vote the way their committee people and ward leader suggest that they vote. So when they, not everybody, obviously, but by and large, they do. And so the ward leader of the 50th Ward, I had some power. She was really powerful. She really could get anything she wanted from elected officials because they saw her as someone who could deliver votes to them. And that was powerful. And democracy is about power. It's just a power sharing arrangement. So I had no idea, but now I know. Okay, next, the government is powerful. Well, the governments are powerful. So there isn't just one government. There's state government, there's federal government, there's local government, and there are actually other governments. If you have a homeowners association or a condo association, that's a government. If you're in a union, that's a government, right? So governments are powerful. In fact, governments really are. I think you have a government anytime you have people who turn over their power to a smaller group of people and allow them to act on their behalf. Okay. And in elections in particular, governments are, state government and local government, county government have a lot of control over how people vote. You can see it now all over the country. And you can ask the question, why is it that while in other countries there are uniform election systems, why is it in the United States that our election systems are governed at the state and county level? Okay, a ballot is like an SAT test. And I will admit that a ballot looks like an SAT test, right? It's got the little circles you're supposed to fill in. Well, anyway, if you're lucky enough to vote on a paper ballot, it probably looks like an SAT test a little bit. But a ballot is not like an SAT test. First of all, there's no right answer. There's no consequence, right, to wrong answer, right? No one's going to come and mark you down for it. And it's absolutely okay to ask your neighbor for help. And that goes back to the point about blocks, that it's absolutely okay to say, you know what, I'm going to empower my neighbor by asking her who she voted for, and I'm going to vote for the same person. That is totally okay. And in fact, and this goes to the debate about identity politics in this country. Identity politics is inevitable from democracy because it's so powerful to form a block, and it's so easy to form a block around things about you that you can't change and that everybody can tell just by looking at you. Things like gender, race, age. So there is nothing wrong with identity politics. Identity politics isn't even really a thing when it comes to democracy. It's a way of creating a block. And I think that the argument against identity politics, when you hear it, boils down to my identity has been doing identity politics and we've liked it. But now that other people are doing, we're going to put a name on it and try and believe it's a bad thing. All right. Okay. Finally, when you get involved in politics and democracy and elections, trust your instincts. And this is actually true for your academic career and everything. Trust your instincts. If it seems like people are telling you stuff that isn't true, it's probably not true. It's not that it's not true. It's that the reason you think it's not true, there's something to it. Okay, especially, and that's the gift of mathematics, actually. But risk only what you can afford to lose. So when you get into politics and elections, it's very real out there. It's very real because it is about power. And it's important to protect yourself. So I guess I should say one last word about why is this talk called Building Trust in Elections? Well, I because of that original question, which is to some extent addressed by the vote visualizer. How do we build trust in elections? One way is for people to really engage with election results enough that they can actually find outliers and find things that look irregular and find out why they happened. And that process can really build trust, because if you go through an election with a fine-tooth comb and every outlier you find actually has a reasonable explanation, that's a good reason to feel more confidence in the results. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that amazing talk. Everyone, if you want to join me in thanking Stephanie for her presentation there. We've got a couple minutes before we break for lunch. If anybody would like to ask a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Actually, if it's okay, I might ask a quick question, because when you mentioned, your timeline where you had this initial question about, here's the simple idea for checking whether this works or not, and you came across some pretty immediate obstacles. I know for me personally, if I'm interested in something and it's like in the other room, it's like, can't really get to the other room, but you really got drawn in. I'm just curious, was there something in particular that like really made you want to keep pulling on this thing hard, or?
I think it had a lot to do with where I was in my life. I mean, I left academia in 2002 because #MeToo. So I just out, and it was pretty traumatic. And I had some health issues that actually I still have some reasonably disruptive health issues. And so it was hard for me to go and get a regular job. And I had support from my family. I had made a lucky investment. I was okay financially. My daughter was 8. It was like a good time not to be working since I could afford that, not to be working for pay since I could afford that. And then, what do I do with my time? So I had time to follow up. And I was really interested in, I had been interested in presidential elections before that, but I'm interested in power, and I think most people are. And I was really interested, in how do you make something work? And I think also kind of having something so paradigm shattering happen, what I'm talking about actually is a moment where I went to my state rep, who actually sat on the committee in the Pennsylvania legislature. She was the chair of the committee that decided about voting machines. At that time, we voted on voting machines that left, that left no paper record, not even a secondary one, of what the voter did while she was voting. And I knew this was a real problem. And I went to talk to my state legislator about it. And I basically said, I know, I'm smart. I know this is true. and boy, she could not care less. Okay. She couldn't care less. Why? Because I'm just one person, right? Now, if I go and I get myself elected the head of the ward committee, then she's going to listen to me more. Although at that point, she didn't listen to me because she's the one I beat to be the head of the ward committee. But I think, having this I had these illusions about democracy and government, and that things were fair, and that people wanted to do what's right. And that was really powerful when that was shattered.
All right, thank you.
I had one more quick question if we have time for it, Andy, but you can shut me down.
If you can make it quick, that'd be great, just because I know that there's only an hour for lunch, so.
Just you'd mentioned there's potential sort of avenues of research using this verified voting, and you know one of the things is sort of checking these outliers and seeing what's going on. But are there other sort of directions or possibilities to sort of engage with this data and make a project out of it?
Yes, absolutely. So correlations, right? You can merge this data with other data that interests you. My graduate student right now is working on merging it with COVID rate data from the fall. And our first question is, did that affect votes for Trump? So we have COVID data by county, and so that's one thing. What else? I mean, in political science, there are a ton of questions. Weather data, right? There's this old truism, or was, that, when it rains, certain ethnic groups don't come out to vote when it rains. So that kind of thing.
Awesome. Thanks very much. If you actually, sorry, I should have said, if everybody can join me in thanking Stephanie again for her amazing presentation. That was an awesome talk, a good way to finish the first session. And while you're at it, give yourselves a hand. We have gotten through the first session, 5 really amazingly interesting talks. I appreciate everyone being here. And I'm really looking forward to the afternoon session. But in the meantime,